It's a high bar, and we don't feel like the question of alternatives and analysis of ways to minimize or in fact avoid the potential impacts here has been met. The representative from PG&E mentioned that this is about whether reducing uncertainty outweighs those marine resource impacts, acknowledged impacts from this project. And we don't feel like the case has been made, particularly when framed in that way, that this is about reducing uncertainty. We don't feel the case has been made that this particular test at this time is needed in order to do that, and more work is needed on that front. In terms of our recommendation to deny on that basis, there was also an observation about not sending PG&E back to do more work. Well, our recommendation is not directing PG&E in any particular fashion what to do. We're making findings under the Coastal Act, and we can't make the findings that you need to make in order to have that override take effect. What happens after you make your decision here today is entirely up to PG&E and the project proponents here. So I did want to underscore that, again, we aren't discounting or saying that these issues of hazard assessment aren't important, and the questions of public policy around energy policy in California are important. But this is not the project, in our view, that is appropriate at this time, given the tests you have to consider under the Coastal Act.
Good. We'll come back to the Commission for deliberation. And I'll call on Commissioner Bochco.
I move that the Commission approve Coastal Development Permit E12005, subject to conditions set forth in the staff recommendations specified below, and I'm recommending a no vote.
Moved by Commissioner Bochco and seconded by Commissioner Sanchez. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, I would. First, I want to thank staff for, I think, a brilliant report. Not only did you give us the report, you gave us months in advance. Oh, you like that? Oh, that's nice. So cute. I please them so seldomly. But you also gave us a lot of ancillary information that we could go and research, and spent a lot of time, I know a number of us did, spent a lot of time reading as much as we could to fully understand these issues. I also want to thank PG&E, especially Mark Krause, because I really feel like when I wanted to know something, even though it might not have been a comfortable situation or a comfortable answer, I felt like I got those. And if they didn't have them, I felt like they would go and get them for me. And whether or not we agree on the answers, or we agree even on the analysis of the answers, I do believe in good faith that PG&E, especially the fellows I've been dealing with, are really trying to do a good job and protect the public. I also want to thank all of you for coming here and being so vocal and smart and educated. I was very pleased. A lot of times we have these big meetings and a lot of people come and they don't know what they're talking about. But you guys have done your homework, and I really appreciate what you've done, and especially the young people. I mean, it's such a blessing to see really young, vibrant people who care about this planet. So thank you very much. Anyway, enough about you. To speak to the seismic test. I think there's just no question from the staff report and other information that we've gotten that this seismic testing is not consistent with the Coastal Act, sections 30230, 30231, and its significant and unavoidable impacts to marine resources. I think the staff report did a very good job of giving us substantial evidence that the level of impacts that PG&E was projecting under their analysis were underestimated. I saw that in many different areas. I think also it was very difficult to measure or predict what these levels were and the intensity of them because of the nature of the test, the duration of the test, the inshore situation with the test, the shallow water, the unpredictability of mammals coming through. I know in the July 2012 Northeast Pacific seismic study, where so many more whales went by than they ever predicted, and they didn't see them until it was too late. to do level A impact. I mean, those kinds of things we have to come to expect, even though they may not happen. We've got to take them into account. So I think in any analysis, I think the staff's analysis levels were much more protective of marine life and probably more realistic. I also think that it was very clear that the harbor porpoise, being such a specific, special creature in this one area, and because of the unknown incidents of what has happened to it recently, shows that they could potentially reach that biological removal level. And that's just something that if it happened, it's done. So in balancing what I'll get to in a minute, the risk versus the benefits, I think those are really, really big and likely risks. As far as the mitigation, I really appreciate the long, long list of monitoring systems that PG&E offered to be a part of and to pay for. Unfortunately, they're just not adequate. Again, when you look at the staff report and compare a lot of similar studies, you see that the weather conditions, the sea conditions were underestimated. The fact that at night you can't see as a marine observer. The fact that a lot of these are the kind of mitigation that you do just to see what, to assess what's going to happen. And so maybe the next test you make will benefit from that, but this test won't. These animals are going to be impacted. And again, since we're not even applying for level A taking, it seems to me it's so likely that level A is going to take place that that again is an enormous risk versus what we'll talk about in a minute about benefit. Many people in this room, myself included, were participants in the Marine Protected Area research and meetings, and it was a very difficult, long, drawn-out process for Californians. A lot of times it'd be environmentalists against the fishermen, and the fishermen's fear that the fish would go away, and the environmentalists' fear that the fish had already gone away, and we needed to protect them. And I think it would be a tragedy, really, to take away the ability to measure what we have set forth in just so recently. And again, it is a network, and it does depend on the interworkings of all of it. I also feel obligated to the fishermen in this room and those they represent that there should be something going on where someone is analyzing the decline of the fish in this area. I saw many exhibits in the staff report showing that it is steadily going down. This idea that perhaps the low intensity seismic tests are a part of that, it's important to know that, and I think something should be done about that, but that of course is not a part of our application at the moment. I appreciate that PG&E feels a lot of pressure from the fact that there exists this technology that they haven't used offshore. I appreciate that there are several agencies that seem to be pushing them in that direction, but I must say those agencies are not designed to protect the coast, and that's what we're here to do. And because the technology exists, we don't need to use it. It's nice to know it exists. It's nice to know that if everything else you do is possible and it doesn't turn out with something you critically need to know, then perhaps you go and you look at that particular technology. I know I have a doctor who wants me to have every test known to man, and I keep telling him, you know, the insurance company doesn't agree with you. You know, there comes a time when a test is just a test and it doesn't need to be done. So that's kind of where I want to end up here, is does this high intensity 3D test in this one area, box 4, need to be done? I asked many, many questions of PG&E about this, and I really, really wanted to know. And they did convince me that there is a target there, 7 or 8 miles below the ocean, that would give them some more information about the Hosbury Fault and how it dips down and goes maybe under the plant, maybe not, how it connects up to the other faults, maybe not, But again, when I ask the final question, the hard question of, if you find out the worst case that the Hosby fault is going to do this, all of those things happen under this 3D test, you see it, would it make a difference? Would the plant be unsafe? And their answer was, it is highly unlikely. We have so much data on this information. We feel that we can judge it from what we have. And they feel that the plant is safe. Now, I'm not sitting here telling you this plant is safe. I don't know. I mean, as everyone said, you know, you've got a nuclear plant on faults. There's probably a high degree that that's not historically or futuristically safe. But what I'm saying is, it seems to me that the thing in front of us, which is this 3D test, that is not going to tell you. And if it's not going to tell you, then why am I doing this to the ocean? So when you talk about the second prong of the test, which I know staff report didn't go to, but I will go there, and if the rest of the commission agrees with me, I hope they go there with me, is that we make a finding that this test is not necessary for the public welfare. In essence, public welfare, it's necessary we don't do this. And that if during all of the studies they have with the SHAC and with NRC and with everyone who's testing, and God bless people for doing that, you know, Fukushima made an impression. If they find out there's just no way in the world they can judge this plant safe without this one test, then you come back. But I wouldn't suggest they come back next year with just a few bits more information. I really do understand what PG&E is saying in that regard. So hopefully I didn't say anything, you know, that makes everyone's life too difficult, but we can move on to that. I just want to say, just on a personal note, you can't predict earthquakes. I really don't believe you can. And I found it actually sort of sad and yet funny that, you know, there's 6 scientists in Italy now are sitting in prison because they failed to predict an earthquake. And I thought, you know, if that happened to in America, no one would be a scientist. So I don't think that we can get the information that would make us all feel safe, or even prove to the scientists that the plant will be safe doing this test. So I think I'll stop. Thank you.
Commissioner Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I want to start by saying that I do find that our Coastal Commission staff is particularly well qualified to address underwater projects, including the project before us. I disagree with PG&E's statement that our staff is not capable of analyzing the relevant public safety issues. The project proposes to do seismic surveys that rely on the use of air guns to generate high-energy acoustic pulses capable of passing through ocean waters and penetrating from 6 to 9 miles into the seafloor. PG&E seems to be expediting this application despite having a mound of studies they've just completed. The record is silent as to whether they have either not had the, including sea otters, the gray whale, porpoises, to spiritual and cultural resources such as the artifacts and tribal remains in the submerged ancient Chumash tribal lands, and to what they said, what they call grandfather dolphins, and to the fishing industry. There were certain points that were made by today by PG&E. One, that the first one being that with regards to how to mitigate impacts. The statement, the quote was, quote, "Stopping the work mitigates the impacts." Stopping the work mitigates the impacts. That is without any review, without any decision as to how much damage or destruction happens before it stops, and then to say that there's nothing they have to do to mitigate those impacts. And I do disagree that monitoring is mitigation. Monitoring is not mitigation. I also disagree with the claims process that was proposed for the fishing industry. How will something like that work when you have a standing position that there either are no impacts or significant impacts? So there would not have been any kind of a claim, any kind of mitigation for the fishing industry. And then there was mentioned shareholders during the presentation. Did not mention the tremendous monetary impacts to the ratepayers. Evidence was presented via testimony that air guns silence whales at closer range, hearing loss and injury. This particular area is core habitat of harbor porpoises, which are acutely sensitive to man-made noise. If the animals don't leave, the injury will increase significantly. Also, for my decision, the area is part of the MPA network, and that this area is particularly critical to the MPA statewide. I was also persuaded by the testimony of Dr. Bruce Gibson, our Supervisor Bruce Gibson, who testified as to lack of state-of-the-art processes, including the ship being used. It appears that PG&E is proposing a highly dangerous to life, human and animal, in order to address public safety issues, and that they are doing it in denial, that there will be no impacts and therefore no real mitigation is necessary, except of course to stop the work, after how much destruction is unknown. Coastal Commission staff stated in the report that the key Coastal Act issues of concern is the project's significant and unavoidable impacts to marine resources. Seismic surveys are among the very loudest anthropogenic underwater sound sources and can cause disturbance, injury, loss of large number of marine species due to air gun noise. And a particular concern were impacts to the harbor porpoise, the Morro Bay stock, whose range is limited to the general project area. The project is therefore inconsistent with the Coastal Act's marine resource protection policies of section 30230 and 30231. Applying the Coastal Act's coastal dependent industrial development override policy of section 30260, I find the proposal does not meet any, and I agree with Commissioner Bochco, does not meet any of the three tests of that policy. The alternative locations are feasible or more environmentally damaging. It doesn't meet, number one, alternative locations are infeasible or more environmentally damaging to do, otherwise would adversely affect the public welfare, and adverse environmental effects are mitigated to the maximum extent feasible. There's just not enough information that was provided to staff and to us, either through the staff report or during testimony. So insufficient information, no independent review, and not legally required. There was also testimony that there were also impacts to highly endangered gray whale, that they were left out, and the northern elephant seals. So in sum, I support the motion for denial. Thank you.
Commissioner Burke. Commissioner Burke.
Oh, I'm sorry. When I was 6 years old, I didn't want to be a soldier, and I didn't want to be a fireman, and I didn't even want to be a policeman. I wanted to be an ichthyologist. And so I started collecting fish when I was 6 years old. And I wanted to make it my lifelong profession. And I moved through my life with that in mind until I got to be 16 years old. And my mother explained to me that she was not going to invest 4 years of college money on somebody to study fish. It didn't stop me from collecting fish. Like most mothers, she was right. And she sent me to school, and I learned stuff that helped me continue to collect my fish. And if you go to my house today, you find 9 saltwater tanks in my house, the biggest of which is 8 feet tall, 6 feet wide, and 2 feet deep. So it holds right around 1,400 gallons of salt water. And every day that I'm home, they're like my children. Now, that's been 67 years I've been doing this. So I agree with Commissioner Bochco that the PG&E people have made a presentation which, you know, from their perspective was rational and fair, and they tried. But my big tank is in my TV room, okay? And my oldest daughter comes and watches football with me every Sunday. And when the Raiders score and she yells, now I know the Raiders scoring is kind of not so often, you know, but it does happen occasionally. And she yells, in that tank are fish from all over the world. From Polynesia, from Hawaii, from Florida. And they react to Christine. So, you know, it just never made sense to me, you know, so. Now, on the other side of the issue, the executive director of the South Coast Air Quality Management District is a PhD in ichthyology. Now, he and I argue all the time, and we go fish shopping together all the time and stuff. Now, he absolutely was opposed to this motion. He absolutely said, man, you can't support something like that. But he said something that I thought I would pass along to my colleagues and to those in the audience, because he thinks about it from both sides. He thinks about it from the fish side and from the air side. And he said, you know, San Onofre is going to go down. Now, it looks like to him it's going to go down permanently. Now, that may be wishful thinking on his part because he lives about 2 miles from San Onofre. But he said it's going to add 10 million metric tons of greenhouse gas to the Southern California air when that electricity from that nuclear plant goes down and has to be replaced by older generators. Okay? So, if that greenhouse gas drops to sea level, I don't know how that affects the fish. But it's just something because, you know, PG&E will be back here in a year for their relicensing, and I think the chances to stop it, some of us will be here and some of us won't be here. But if I had to bet on it, I would bet that they get relicensed. So, you know, I don't think there's any other place to go but the motion that's on the floor. But you need to think about all the ramifications of what's going on here, because the guy from the Chumash Indians, he had me right out the gate. He when he said, you know, we have to, yeah, there you are. When he said, you know, we have to care about us all, care about it, every living thing. Now, I'm not so hot on the spider thing. But the fish and the birds, I'm right there.
Commissioner Zimmer.
Thank you. I move to amend the resolution to include, in addition to the language that staff has suggested, specifically that none of the 3 necessary findings under 30260 can be made.
Second it.
May
Is that
I?
adequate to?
Can I just ask staff for clarification? My understanding that that's in the findings, and so my question is, does it need to be in the resolution?
Well,
Would you like to speak to it while staff is?
If that, my comments are the same regardless. But
Okay,
I thought that
it's
if
just
we-
a technicality.
Okay.
I believe it's in the findings and
I think
therefore
you
covered
would
by the
need to-
resolution.
I think give us some direction about what you would like the findings to be in those other two tests. We would bring back to you revised findings in the future for your adoption, but we would appreciate some direction.
The support for the change in the findings, which you have just articulated.
Right, okay. I was under the impression we had to amend the resolution in order to come back with additional findings, but that's fine.
I think you do. No, I
Okay.
think that's what you're hearing, is that you do.
Okay, okay, so
Is there a second to the motion?
Oh, yes, there was.
Sorry, I'm now having a negative head shake.
I had a second.
Okay, staff? I'll stop trying to summarize what I think you're saying and just ask you. Are you clear what Commissioner Zimmer's motion is?
The motion is to change the resolution
Change the
and
motion.
the findings
If
to
it's
reflect
now-
all three tests.
Correct.
In
Yeah.
30260.
If staff feels it's necessary in order to, the commissioners are speaking to more than just the finding that staff, or the resolution that staff had, so.
Yes, we do not believe changing the resolution is necessary, but staff can come back with revised findings if that's what the commission so chooses to do.
Okay, well then I will just make my comments as,
Okay, and withdraw your motion, your
Withdraw
substitute
my-
motion.
if it's not necessary, right, okay. First of all, I agree with everything that Commissioner Bochco said, and I'm going to try not to repeat. But I do want to highlight a few things that struck me particularly. First, one of them was the presentation from the C.O.A.S.T, and one question I had for staff was, I was concerned that the staff report left the impression that we couldn't make a finding that the C.O.A.S.T concerns with the spiritual connection to the sea and to the sea creatures is considered a part of the cultural resource that we are here to try to protect and mitigate. So I had the impression from the staff report that if the state historic preservation officer doesn't call it a cultural resource, then we don't either. And I just want to make it clear that I think it is, regardless. I think, telling personal stories here, I think those of us who have been blessed with the opportunity to be on the ocean and have had porpoises pop up next to us and say hello and play and come along with us for 5 minutes or 10 or however long they choose to stay, it's a blessing. You don't have to be Chumash to recognize it as such, but I do respect that the Chumash have a very special connection to that. The second comment I have is that I'm a little troubled by how this has been framed for us. The comment was made that the staff had been pushed and rushed to try and come up with this staff recommendation that it had to go forward now, and that then I was told in my ex parte, and I guess other commissioners were also, that PG&E wants an up or down vote, doesn't want to be told to come back to improve the analysis or provide additional, and I can understand that. And that's why I think it's important for us to articulate the additional findings with regard to the other prongs of the override, because I don't want the commission to appear to be playing loosey with the football either, and to give an applicant a false impression that if they just come back in another year with a few $1 million more worth of consulting fees and tests and so forth, that everything will be fine. Because my bottom line on this is that it's going to take a lot to convince me that the second test, in particular the public welfare test, can be met for this type of proposal. And the reason is, and I think, there can come a day that everyone agrees that the applicant has come up with the best possible survey and the best possible technology, and there can come a day when everyone can agree, I think, that the impacts are mitigated to the maximum extent feasible, even though we will continue to conclude that they will be significant impacts. But I haven't been able to get around, in my mind, this public welfare test. And it's partly because of the way it's been framed to us, and that from the proponents of the project, and including letters that we've had from the PUC and from others, and from the building trades who have talked about the jobs involved in the nuclear industry and so forth. And those are all legitimate concerns, but I don't think they're relevant to our findings on this particular, the appropriateness of this particular kind of test. And so the reason that I kept trying to ask questions in my ex parte about what it is exactly that this testing will contribute to the state of knowledge that we don't already know or suspect. That's why that was so important to me, and I have not heard an answer. I have not heard anyone say that no matter how good these images are, 3D, whatever formation it is, that we will be 1 inch closer to understanding, let alone being able to forecast whether, when, and how great a magnitude an earthquake could hit in that area. And so and then the second question I was trying to ask was, if we assume that we've been told that the plant was built to withstand a 7-point magnitude quake, and if we assume that through some combination of circumstances, be it these additional faults and how they interact with the faults they knew about back in 1980 when they first licensed the plant, 84, if we assume that there is a possibility of a disastrous quake, an 8.5 or a 9.0 quake, are there design fixes, are there technologies that we know about that are available, whether they're feasible economically, are they available at any cost to retrofit that plant so that it would be safer and so that it would be able to withstand such a quake? And the answer I thought I got to that was, well, that's not where we would go with that information. If we got the information from this imaging that would lead us in the direction of concluding that there was a much higher, that there was a probability or a risk of an 8.5 or 9.0 quake, then we would go into this SSHAC process, and we would then assume that even though the magnitude will be higher, then there's a much lower expectation of the frequency of that occurring, so that the risk would be overall lower or the same. And so the message was, well, we're not really going to do anything, and we're not going to expect the NRC to do anything differently because we're going to be taking the position that the risk level is the same. So I'm not weighing here public safety in the way it's been framed, because it isn't a question of the safety of, I'm 90 miles downwind, so my grandchildren. It's not between their immediate safety or the people of San Luis Obispo County right now and the impacts to the marine mammals. We're down to this claim of these tests being capable of reducing some uncertainty about what the magnitude could be. So iPads are nice because I just looked up a little poem by T.S. Eliot called Little Gidding. And it's about, we shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of all of our exploring, we shall end up in the same place we began and know it for the first time. And that's at the end of the testimony where I sit. Because I think ultimately we're going to get into that realm of earthquake prediction or earthquake forecasting, which has been a complete failure throughout time. I came upon a recent book by Nate Silver called The Signal and the Noise, ironically. A couple of weeks ago I picked it up. And I picked it up because his name's been in the news as the only person in America who predicts anything accurately. So I picked up the book, and lo and behold, there's a chapter in it about earthquake prediction, and it's called Desperately Seeking Signal. And it's really quite interesting because what it boils down to is that we can't predict earthquakes, and that earthquakes occur when the stress along the fault line reaches a point where something shifts. And so again, I was back to the 3D imaging of how can a photograph tell me what the stress level is on a given fault. So I came to the conclusion that we're where we started, and that these tests are not going to do us any good in terms of protecting the public welfare. And on the other side of it, the impacts to the marine environment are really clear, and I think have been understated. I agree with those that have said that. I just want to point out, too, that I'm sorry that this came to us so late, because until, as I understand it, the State Lands Commission made their decision, there had not been any environmental analysis by any of the agencies who previously had expressed opinions as to whether this testing should go forward or not. I actually tried to check to see whether the PUC had an obligation under CEQA, but apparently their decision-making in 2008 was done pursuant to an exemption. So here we have the core issue having been deferred to the very last agency to consider the application. And I think that's really unfortunate. I wish that even though they had no legal obligation under CEQA to consider impacts to environmental resources, that these other agencies that are so supportive of this particular test would have considered them. So that's what I have to say about the public welfare. I'm not going to say that I could never be convinced, but I haven't been given any information that I would call evidence that I could rely on today to say, yes, these 3D images will move us forward in making these communities safer. Thanks.
Commissioner Kinsey.
Thank you. And I especially, like others have said, appreciate the spiritual acknowledgement of our connection within the web of life, all in all, and our tremendous affection as coastal residents for the ocean that we live beside. I'm going to support the motion as it's presented today, and I'm going to try to encourage our commission to even think beyond the specific action we're taking today, along with our staff and with PG&E. The reality for me is that I've just not been convinced that the benefits of this work justify the potential risks or costs to our environment and to the unknown, the unforeseen and unintended consequences that may exist. And I think many people have spoken to the fact that we simply don't have the skills or the abilities to monitor the outcomes that we would be triggering by doing this. I think that if we were to embrace this technology, what we're really doing is opening the door. This isn't just a Box 4 issue. This is the coast of California or even the west coast of the United States. And when we open that door just a crack, it opens all the way. And what we're doing is we would be signaling that we want to continue this idea that we can mask what are essentially political decisions with CYA scientific information. And I really feel that, that we as a people, not we as a commission, we as a people need to think again. And in fact, it's in many respects, I think that we opened the door 50 years ago to this nuclear generation technology as a way of generating power supply. And you know, if there's anything that Californians love as much as our coast, it's consumption. And so I don't really blame PG&E. They are a reflection of our society. And we as a society, not they as a corporation or anything else, need to take responsibility for our future. And this is a first step in that direction by saying that we don't need to have every single bit of information in order to be able to say we're relieved. And in fact, if I think about it, if we were to allow these tests to go forward, I don't think the room would be less filled the year that they come back for relicensing. I think it would still be just as full, and the information would be set aside. So for those reasons, it doesn't mean that I don't think that we're going to have to continue to embrace nuclear power or not. I think that's a decision that we all face in our future, and I think it needs to be weighed within the context of a climate change world. So we're going to have tough choices to make, but it's not a difficult choice today to decide that we don't want to be opening this technology up. And I guess where I want to push our commission and even encourage San Luis Obispo County and PG&E is that I really don't think it's a matter of they just haven't got it right, they don't have the right boat, they don't have the right test regime, that a bunch of scientific panelists can come together and come up with a better, less impacting. I think we ought to just say, use the available information, the substantial information that has been gained since the plant was first designed, and let's make our decisions with what we have available to us going forward, so that we're not in this room or another room like this a year from now trying to dice and slice whether or not it's the least impacting to the environment and it can go forward. Thank you.
Commissioner McClure.
Thank you. I too will be supporting this motion, primarily because we can't predict. And in fact, I have a little slide up here that you can see the number of earthquakes that have happened last week, yesterday, and in the last hour that are happening all over California. And we know that that happens. And we know that I'm not going to be quite as easy on PG&E, because I know that up in my part of the world, when they discovered that the plant was on a fault line, they changed it. They closed it. And then that can assist in the consumption of California's urge or need to have power. But at least let's start taking it and putting it in that direction, rather than pretending that these plants have a lifetime that we should continue to support. My children lived for a while down in San Luis, and it made me crazy, because I knew that it was probably going to go one day, you know. And so I'm going to support this, because I believe that it was it's time to close these plants, and it's time to fix these plants and move towards solar power and alternative energy.
Commissioner Wickett.
Thank you very much. I strongly agree with all the commissioners who have spoken before me with everything they've said, and therefore I'm supporting the motion and obviously supporting staff's recommendation here. I kind of feel like a mosquito in a nudist colony, not knowing where to begin, because there's so many issues involved here. But you know, why don't I start by just quickly thanking staff for doing a great job, and once again stepping up for, you know, doing great work. And although this issue might have been incredibly obvious for you know, 99.5% of the audience here as to the right thing to do, I just really want to thank all of you in the Chumash Nation, kind of helped catalyze that and really set the tone, and backed by, you know, everyone else. It's been really uplifting in a way to be here today. So thank you for that. I also want to make an observation about the commission. You know, it's really neat that this Coastal Commission, which is, you know, we talked about celebrating 40 years today, this commission has not been overtaken by industry. I mean, think about that. Pretty amazing. I mean, we're all here just like you're here, you know, like we don't know, we're just here. So that's really, it's a tribute to the commission, but let's give credit, it's a tribute also to the people who appoints this commission. I mean, it's the governor's office, it's, you know, the state legislature, et cetera. So I just think, we should take a moment and kind of appreciate that's one thing that's really working in this state. And so there you have that. On the kind of legal points and following up on Commissioner Zimmer, and I was happy to second a further motion that it's not just a first condition that wasn't met, and if you kind of do a little fix to that, we can come back and do this another time. Really, for me, it's all three parts of the override that don't make it, and I just don't see a scenario for myself, speaking for myself, where PG&E could get valuable data and do the override on any of the 3 points. So public welfare, obviously adverse environmental effects. I mean, there's a possibility of closing down the plant versus destroying the marine life that surrounds it. If we want to reduce environmental effects, you might even be thinking about killing 2 birds with one, stone there, right? So, so I just, for me, although it's up to PG&E whether or not they want to reapply, I personally would be hard pressed to see a way they would get over the hump. And I want to say to PG&E's behalf, in my dealings with them in the ex-parte, they were very open and honest and straightforward. So just want to make that part of the record as well. And finally, I want to talk about the cost, and I guess that's been mentioned a little bit. To me, I think, especially here in California, and I live next to the Tesla plant up in Northern California, and to me, it's so important that people in California start moving away from nuclear energy and away from decentralized energy sources. And so, I don't know where the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association were today on spending, charging the good people of California $65 million. But, I'd like to see some of those tax groups stepping up here and saying, wait a minute, we could buy probably 30,000 people solar arrays on their houses for the money we're spending just doing this test. And the test is just a test for information, So I mean, think about when we start figuring out how to get rid of the nuclear waste, right? So, but in any event, the point as a commissioner that matters for me is that I support the motion and would be hard pressed to see how an applicant could get to an override on any of the 3 criteria. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Brennan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief because I think this decision needs to move forward, and you deserve to be on the 6 o'clock news, and certainly the fact that you've been asked out by the bear, I think, needs to be on the 6 o'clock news too. But all that being said, I just want to go back to the very beginning of this meeting. I think when Penny Aaliyah played the video about the 40th anniversary of the Coastal Act, and I think that to myself in 1972, sitting in front of the Cardiff Post Office, putting names on a petition, not knowing where this was ever going to go, and then being signed by the governor in 1976, and then being here today to see all the people, the width and breadth of, from older retired folks to teachers to professors to youth in the community, people doing public service out of school, to Ethan and Aaron and the gal from Surfrider out of San Luis Obispo coming here today and making sure that they keep an oar in the water in regards to coastal preservation. It makes me really feel good. And I certainly, while support all the other comments of the commissioners, I want to just say that the coalition that came together to put this book and all the number of organizations, that when something like this does come up, that you're able to coalesce, you're able to do good science, you're able to do it in a way, present itself, be knowledgeable, that as decision makers, it's not about, while it is passion and emotion, it's also good science. And I want to just say that I think that all that being said, it helps as a decision maker to be able to have all that behind you when you lean forward. And for myself, that it's probably come full circle from my brother, who was the legal counsel to the nuclear freeze in '85 and spent a lot of time getting my family out of jail, and most of you out of jail probably at the time, in Diablo, protesting. It's to be sitting here today to make a decision that, you know, while that plan has somewhat of a history, I think the realization that whatever came out of these studies, if they went forward, wasn't going to change anything that was really happening at that plant, really cemented in my mind that the risks that we were taking and where we were going didn't justify the end. So I just want to say thank you again for your firm commitment, and make sure you stay together, keep that network together, and when these kind of issues come forward, we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Commissioner Stewart.
If you can't count already, I just want to add my voice to the support. I just wanted to say, you know, I was really struck by the fact that when I was walking in and saw all of you, how I used to be on that side of the room, and the one great thing about the state of California is you can then be on this side of the table too. I, you know, want to thank staff for a fabulous staff report. It's really nice that we can sit up here and that the Coastal Act really does protect us from this kind of mitigation. I mean, or this kind of impact. And overrides are very difficult to meet. You know, we have override conditions for a reason, but they're very difficult to meet, and I don't even think they got close to meeting the first one. It would be very difficult to convince me that they met the second one, or they could meet the second one, as other commissioners have said. I appreciate the fact that PG&E did not put a hard sell on all of us that we were going to harm people or that people are going to die because of this or anything. So I'd like to thank you. It's been a lonely room for you today. And I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank everyone here. I thought the testimony was incredible. I thought there were, even though the staff did a fabulous job with the staff report, some of you brought up some things that hadn't been considered. All of the other folks who are coastal dependent, whose incomes are based on what goes on in our oceans. It was wonderful to hear from all of you, and certainly with a project like this, they can't mitigate the loss to you. I'm struck by the fact that we just put all these MPAs together, and everyone who spent so much time on them, we're now getting the baseline data for the MPAs. And it's like, what would this do to all those baseline studies? You know, if we really are going to stand for something like MPA, even though they're not, I recognize that they're not actually booming in those areas, I think everyone here has said there'll be an impact to those areas. And, you know, if we can't even the year after we get them, you know, protect them, then what are we really trying to say here? You know, for those, Martha and I live up north, you know, where the plant has been closed. And for those of you who do live in the shadow of nuclear plants, I'm struck by how much you all are saying that marine wildlife outweighs your fears about uncertainty. So that was really powerful. And you know, I have touched a whale too, and I know it's a powerful thing. And so I was just really moved by all of you, and thank you. And I do want to thank PG&E, and you made it easy for us by saying you want to up or down vote today. And you know, I think that when the governor vetoed the bill and said, well, I don't know, that really sent a message to everybody, and that you know, we have the Coastal Act, and it's really easy to make the call on this side of the room. Thanks.
Okay, well.
I should say it's been like church here watching everybody do this.
Speak for yourself.
I was going to say, it's kind of fun. I've done it a couple of times over on this side.
Okay, well, I think before we take a vote, I would just like to add in my 15.5 cents. Perhaps I've overinflated it. I also, another way of putting what many commissioners have said, is that I personally believe the state is asking the wrong question. I personally think that state lands and the California Public Utilities Commission and even the Energy Commission should be investing money into how do we get nuclear power plants off our coast where there are many earthquake faults. Just found a new one last year. You only know where they are with the perfect vision of hindsight. Where there are tsunamis, where there's sea level rise. There's lots of reasons why we shouldn't have nuclear power plants on our coast. That's the question we should be solving. Having said that, as a coastal commissioner, that's not within our jurisdiction. And so I just want to be very clear for the record, because many commissioners have done just what I did. They stated their own personal opinion about what should be happening on the coast. And the issue before us is simply, has PG&E provided enough information to convince us that this study should go forward? And I am hearing a resounding no. They have not provided enough information for this study to go forward. Having said that, we are not telling them to go back and do anything in particular. That's PG&E's decision, to take the decision here. And we're not saying you can't ever do it. We're just saying the onus is on you to convince us to bring enough information that we believe it should go forward. So that's just kind of for the record, to be very clear, because that's what our motion is before us. It says that they have not provided enough information. Staff is wanting to say something? No, they're not saying, all right. So I just wanted to be clear that that's the motion before us, and that's the decision we're making, and we all can't help it. We have our personal feelings about what really should happen in the future of California, but the only decision we're making here is on this survey.
I did want to clarify that we've heard that many commissioners believe this project does not meet all three tests of the override finding, and that would be the basis of your action today, or for many of you, if not all.
That is what I understood.
Including the fact that there's a lack of information to make A, B, and C. And,
So it will require, assuming that this passes, it will require, I assume, coming back with revised findings.
That's correct.
Correct, all right. Is there any unwillingness to vote? Is there any unwillingness for a unanimous yes? No vote. A unanimous no vote on this? Let me just be clear that the maker and the seconder are asking for a no vote. And the passage of this motion will result in denial of the permit application and adoption of the findings, which will come back to us at a future meeting to reflect this hearing. Is there any unwillingness for unanimous no vote? Seeing none, this commission denies the permit application.
There's a second motion. There's a second motion.
Please sit down. There's a second motion. We have to complete this. Failure of this motion to pass will result in the objection. The commission hereby objects to the consistency certification of Pacific Gas and Electric finding that the consistency certification lacks information necessary to evaluate the project's consistency. Thank you very much. With that, we have done it. We'll take a quick break.
I told you we could do it. Yes, we did. Thank you.